So it's been a pretty rough week for the Russian Air Force. I mean, just earlier today, we got footage confirming that a Russian Su-35 fighter was shot down in Kursk. And this is on top of course, all of the losses during Operation Spiderweb, which, by the way, we got more footage just like 30 minutes ago. So let's go ahead and run through that. Now, this was released by the Ukrainian SBU, again, not long ago, saying this footage shows the path of one of the FPV drones from takeoff from the roof of a modular building to hitting an aircraft. So one feed, not cut from start to finish. They say the recording captures the full path of one of the drones from the moment it took off to the destruction of a Russian Tu-22M3 strategic bomber at the Belaya airfield. In particular, the video shows the drone flying a considerable distance and landing without obstacles in the territory of the airport, from which smoke previously hit planes is already rising. And as it approaches here, they say the total cost of damages was $7 billion US. As it approaches, you can see some of the smoke in the fields. Couple different, it leads you to believe that some of these drones may have been shot down or crashed on their way to the target. There's also the possibility that as something detonates, burning material flies into the air in a variety of different directions. But nonetheless, this one coming in after a fair amount of destruction has already happened to the airfields. Now, a couple key points as we let this play. When we're talking about overall battle damage assessments from this attack, it's still kind of challenging to gather. Clearly, some of these planes have been destroyed based off of the footage that we see here, but also some of the overhead satellite imagery. The general number that we're going with right now is somewhere between 12 and 15 that have been visually confirmed losses. Visually confirmed losses of what are believed to be operational aircraft. Based off of that number, I think the best way to put this, and thanks to Jacob Janowski here, who runs Oryx blog, for kind of running this down for me, but he said roughly that represents roughly 20% of Russia's strategic bomber fleet. So that's a real number. Roughly 1 in 5 of Russian bombers no longer operational, no longer existing after this Operation Spiderweb was carried out a couple days ago. Now, Ukraine continues to go with the 41 total aircraft that were targeted. I don't think, as of this point, we have visual confirmation of that many that have been effectively hit, but here's one more video clip showing that at the very least, that's another Tu-22 that caught a drone right on the top. And again, I want to run through a couple pictures here just to show how challenging some of the battle damage assessment is. In some of these areas, there's nothing left. So in a lot of times near the front, we'll have a vehicle destroyed. I'll show some clips of those, tanks or artillery pieces, and you can say, hey, that's clearly a tank. It was a tank. Now it's a burned out hull of a tank. But when you look at the airfield here in Russia, there are areas where it's just dust at this point. I mean, you can look at that and say it probably had an aircraft parked there at one point. That also leads to, when you look at the size of some of the fires coming out of these strikes, there's more and more evidence that these were not only were they operational aircraft, but they were not just parked for storage. They were loaded up with fuel and or munitions, getting ready to carry out strikes inside of Ukraine. So not only did this Operation Spiderweb significantly reduce the capabilities and the quantity of Russia's strategic bomber force, but it also likely saved some lives in Ukraine as it hit some of these aircraft that were preparing to carry out strikes in the coming hours or days. Now, just earlier today, so recording this on June 7th, 2025, we got some footage confirming, and this was confirmed by the Russian side as well, that a Su-35 was shot down over Kursk. So we've got the video of the aircraft burning on the ground. No video at this point of the actual interception. And then Russian channels did earlier confirm fighter bomber, notably, said the pilot safely ejected. He's been rescued, but the loss of the aircraft was confirmed. My understanding is this marks the 8th confirmed destruction of a Su-35 by Ukraine since the war began. Now, there's mixed reporting right now as to whether this was done by some sort of surface-to-air fire, or there's some rumors, I don't think they're validated at this point, that this Su-35 was shot down by a Ukrainian F-16. Again, no verification at this point. We have seen the Ukrainian F-16s become more and more active in the east in recent weeks. We've got footage of GBU strikes, or guided bomb unit strikes, against Russian positions being carried out by Ukrainian F-16s. By and large, these are pretty new. For the most part, since the F-16s have been delivered to Ukraine, we've mostly seen them utilized in some sort of combat air patrol, generally flying in and around Kyiv and mostly pretty far west of the front. helping to intercept missiles and drones during some of these large Russian air attacks. But we really haven't seen a lot of aerial combat or offensive use of this specific platform. But that does look like it might be changing a little bit, especially as we're seeing these GBU strikes or bomb strikes against Russian positions in the east. Now, speaking of those Russian strikes that the F-16s at times are being used to help intercept, overnight, Russia carried out another wave of attacks. I don't have the numbers in terms of the quantity of munitions used at this point, but they went after Kharkiv, a region in the east that it's relatively close to the front, but it hasn't been under this type of bombardment in quite a while. Now, the scale of the bombardment was not drastically different than what we've seen in other portions of Ukraine, but last night they really zeroed in on Kharkiv. According to United 24 Media, a Ukrainian source here, they say Russia launched massive strikes with drones, aerial bombs, and missiles on Kharkiv and its suburbs today, causing destructions and fires. As of now, they're reporting that 1 person was killed, 17 injured, and that includes 2 children. They say a 9-story residential building was hit. Apartments on the upper floors caught fire. Rescuers pulled a woman out from underneath the rubble. Now, one major difference when you're looking at the strikes in Kharkiv is the Russians' ability to use these guided bombs, which have pretty significant range, 40, 50, 60 kilometers plus at times, but they've become much more accurate. They're glide bombs is a good way to describe them. And over the course of the last couple of years, they've gone from being able to generally hit within a couple kilometers of a target, they were just kind of lobbed generally in a direction, to they're pretty consistently hitting the building they want to hit, one after the other after the other. And with Kharkiv being so close to the front lines in the east, that's a risk for all of the residents there. It's not just rockets, or it's not just missiles, it's not just drones, but it's also these glide bombs, which can pack a pretty heavy punch. Now, according to Russia, of course, they say all of these strikes were successful. Their Ministry of Defense said last night the armed forces of the Russian Federation carried out group strikes by high-precision, long-range weapons and unmanned aerial vehicles at the Ukrainian defense industry enterprises. Workshops that were manufacturing strike unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, maintenance, weapons, and hardware repairing centers, as well as ammunition depots of the armed forces of Ukraine. The goal of the strike was achieved. All of the assigned targets were engaged. And as is kind of the norm, the videos that we're seeing do not appear to be any military targets. These look civilian targets. Now, I've said countless times before, Russia is not exclusively going after civilian targets. They, throughout the course of this war, have successfully hit a lot of Ukrainian military facilities throughout the country. But I would say it's pretty safe to say that Russia is a little more free and loose with their targeting and isn't nearly as concerned about collateral damage when they go after some of these facilities. Maybe there was a military location nearby. Maybe there wasn't, because there is an aspect of this that is just straight up terror as well, kind of trying to terrorize the population. And when you're looking at areas like Kharkiv and Sumy further north, there's going to be a desire by Russia to kind of depopulate those areas with the hope of creating this sort of buffer zone in the east, something that Putin talked about in recent weeks. It's going to be harder and harder to do that if the Ukrainian population stays in those city centers. So the depopulation of those locations close to the front is likely right in line with Russia's objectives. So now, in discussing the attacks yesterday, which were generally carried out all across Ukraine, there were 3 first responders that were killed, and we raised the idea that this may have been the result of a double tap type of operation, specifically targeting first responders. We've got a little more information on that today that I wanted to share, coming from Egberg Mikkelsen, the envoy from Denmark to Ukraine, in a video on scene. Here we go.
Good morning. I'm the ambassador of Denmark, and this morning I'm in the peaceful neighborhood of Juliavsky, which is not very far from the embassy. The reason why I'm here, you can see behind me, this is an office building that was attacked twice during the night. The second attack occurred when the rescue workers and firefighters were inside the building, and 3 of them sadly lost their lives. I've come here to express my condolences and support for the rescue workers and to thank them for the work that they're doing, but I'm also here to condemn this heinous and despicable attack on a civilian target. This is an office building.
So as you can see there, from the actual scene, the location of one of the strikes yesterday where those first responders were killed, and it does look more and more like that was the actual tactic utilized, where one strike followed up. I mean, this isn't a hardened target. right? In some cases, you need to carry out 1, 2, 3 strikes back to back because you're trying to get past air defense assets, or you're trying to penetrate a deep bunker, something like that. This is an office building. I mean, there doesn't look like a hardened target by any stretch of the imagination. So there's not a lot of reasons where you would carry out one strike and then wait 20, 30 minutes and then carry out the other, unless the intent is to go after the first responders, which is not a new tactic. It's played out as long as places have been bombed around the world, unfortunately. Now, once again, it was not just Ukraine on the receiving end of attacks last night. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they say over the course of a few hours last night, they intercepted and destroyed 36 Ukrainian aircraft fired into Kursk, Bryansk, Kaluga, Smolensk, and Moscow. And we got some videos of some of those drones flying through Russian airspace. And we talked about this yesterday, where a big component of this fight right now is Ukraine continuing to show their population, their Western supporters, and Russia that they are still in the fight. And the easiest way to do that, the most effective way to do that, is to continue to launch drone strikes into Russian territory. And it's kind of something that German Chancellor Merz, who is here in the United States this week, talked about, saying this is, we have to make sure that Ukraine has the strength to continue fighting. Strength through peace is essentially what he said, which is an interesting term that he went with, because that's something we hear more and more from the Trump administration and the Hegseth Department of Defense. But nonetheless, I want to play a couple clips from German Chancellor Merz here. First, talking about how he pushed President Trump to try to increase sanctions or add some pressure to Russia. Here we go.
Axios is reporting that the president called this attack, quote, strong and, quote, badass. Do you agree with him?
Well, the country, Ukraine, is the victim of a very hard aggression, and this aggression is coming from Russia only. And Russia has it in its own hands to stop this war immediately. They could stop it overnight. So, and that's the reason why I asked the president to go along with us to put more pressure on this government, on Putin, to come to an end with this terrible war. I was a little bit more optimistic a couple of weeks ago when the first diplomatic initiatives were more or less successful. In the meantime, it's extremely complicated to bring the Russians to the table. That's the reason why I asked the president to do more on Russia and to put pressure on Russia. You know that there is a bill in the Senate drafted on more sanctions. Just had a debate, discussion with some colleagues from the Senate. So I very much hope that we will go along and that we will do the same. And the same has one goal: bring this terrible war to an end.
I mean, to be fair, that attack, Operation Spiderweb, it was strong and it was badass. I mean, it was unique in military history. So that's kind of, speculation. He said, she said, hearsay, if you will, that President Trump actually said that. But nonetheless, it kind of fits with what actually took place. And by all accounts, it does seem like Merz was here in the U.S. and a couple different statements he made while on camera, saying he's really trying to push the United States to toughen our stance. He mentioned the sanctions bill that's right now moving through Congress. Doesn't seem like there's been a lot of progress on that. It's not necessarily a priority from anything we can see, but Merz continued here. The anchor pushed back, saying, does that make peace harder to achieve? And this is where Merz went with the peace through strength comment that I think was honestly directed right at President Trump and Secretary Hegseth. Here we go.
But does it complicate talks, peace talks, if our president, President Trump, is calling these attacks, these words, strong?
Well, my personal view is very clear and very simple. Only strength brings peace. And if you are weak, you invite aggression. So Ukraine has to be strong. And that's the reason why we are giving support, militarily, financially, politically, for itself. And this is something we would like to be continued as long as necessary. But again, our common goal is to bring this terrible war to an end.
So look, based off of what we've seen from Merz so far, it does seem like he's going to draw a pretty hard line when it comes to all things Russia, Ukraine, and is staunchly in the pro-Ukraine camp, which isn't all that big of a surprise. But it is nice to see him kind of on tour like this, pushing others to say, like, this is really serious. We have to do something here. Let's come together and find a solution to bring this war to an end, because Germany, there's a couple different countries that fit this bill, but Germany is going to be one of the leaders when it comes to some sort of European-focused security solution or coalition of the willing, and certainly an increase in the German or in the European military industrial base. So It's nice to see this from Merz. We'll see if it continues. Then shifting over to President Trump, who was asked yesterday by a reporter, and I'm going to read this out and then we'll play the clip because it's kind of hard to hear. But a reporter said, did the Ukraine drone strikes against the bombers, did that change your view of the cards that Zelensky has? Again, kind of going back to when Trump in the Oval Office said to Zelensky, you don't have the cards, kind of saying you need to negotiate, you need to settle down on those demands. Trump's response was, quote, they gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him. Let's give that a listen.
On Russia-Ukraine, did the Ukraine drone strikes against the bombers inside Russia, the airfields, did that change your view at all of what Zelensky, the cards he has?
Well, they gave Putin a reason to go in and bomb the hell out of him last night. That's the thing I didn't like about it. When I saw it, I said, here we go. Now it's going to be a strike, you know.
All right, so it turns out interviews on airplanes are not the most conducive to high-quality audio. Who'd have thought? But look, I'm not going to get hung up in the semantics here. I don't think this was a particularly productive statement to suggest that Putin needed an excuse or has now been given an excuse to do anything at all, let alone ramp up and continue the bombing in Ukraine. But quite frankly, this is pretty on brand, pretty consistent from what we've heard from President Trump recently. My gut still tells me that he's getting more and more frustrated, that he's not been able to bring this war to a close and doesn't have the leverage and the pressure that maybe he thought that he and the United States did have. So I feel like we're going to see him step further and further away from trying to play a direct role in negotiating an end to this conflict. Now, shifting back into Ukraine here, there was an article that came out in the Kyiv Post I wanted to highlight here real quick, where it's talking about, once again, evidence that Russia is executing Ukrainian POWs. In this case, before they're even POWs, they're wounded on the battlefield, and it sounds like Russia is given the order, in this particular instance, to go over and execute those soldiers rather than take them prisoner. Because the logistics, right? It's too much. We don't want to have to deal with that. Anyways, they say Ukrainian intelligence has intercepted a call where a Russian commander was heard to order his troops to execute captured Ukrainian soldiers. Say at the beginning of the conversation, the Russian officer warns his subordinates about the presence of Ukrainian forces, stating that one Ukrainian soldier has already been captured, but 3 others are nearby. Quote, they're here too. You guys be more careful. We've taken 1 Ukrainian soldier and 3 more are wandering around here. The commander then made it clear that these soldiers are wounded. Quote, there are 3 kokols, the Russian slur for Ukrainians, crawling around. There are 300s, which is the term for wounded, moving west. Then he said, quote, in your situation, don't take them prisoner, eliminate them. The commander explicitly instructed them not to capture the wounded, but to immediately kill them on the spot. He continues, quote, we've already taken 1 effing prisoner, but eliminate the others so you don't have to drag them into the shelter and expose yourselves. So, again, this isn't anything new. Tragically, we've seen this has been a theme from the start of the war, and we just discussed it in a recent video, how Amnesty International and the Red Cross have put out, and the United Nations have put out countless reports at this point saying, yes, Russia is executing POWs, and then once they are actually captured, if they make it into a Russian prison, there is overwhelming evidence that they are being tortured during their stay there. And when bodies are coming home, they've been mutilated and clear signs of torture. So once again, just even more evidence in this case, intercepted radio communication that the order right at the front in this particular unit is to execute wounded soldiers rather than bring them back and capture them as prisoners. But nonetheless, that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.